It's very nice to be here. My name is I'm moderating this session, and I'm very pleased to be on air live with all of you and everyone participating in this session. Let's just get straight to what we're doing, because we've got with us Carl Sackey, who's the MD for GC Net in Accra, and it's very, very nice to have you with us, Carl. My first question is just, please also, I just want everyone to join in from wherever they are. We're live now. So the more people joining in, the better, and the more the questions, the better as well. So, Carl, let me start off. Just tell us about yourself, first of all.
Much, Raghav, and good afternoon from Accra. I think that the first thing is you try to change my designation by making me the MD. I am the Business Development Manager. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I just thought I'd promote you I know it's not my prerogative, but there you go.
No, thank you very much, and I'm sure that it's going to happen one day. Yeah. Anyway, so I have a background in computer science. I graduated from the University of Science and Technology in 1994. I've been in IT all my life, basically Oracle background, then Unix, and now I'm in IT security, project management, and in GCNet, where I work now, I happen to be project manager and business development manager. So I handle both projects, and I play a supervisory role when it comes to the project in GCNet, moving from IT to more management bias. I also am the first, yeah.
Go on. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Okay, and I also happen to be the president for ISACA in Accra because I have an interest in governance. I'm interested in audit, risk, and security. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we'll get into those points about audit, risk, and security, and certainly governance, because that's a very big issue, not just, of course, in Ghana, but across the whole of the continent, affecting the private sector and, of course, the governments as well. But first of all, just give us an overview, Carl. You said you've been in IT all your life. What does GCNet do? What are its areas of work, and what are the areas of businesses that you're developing in your role as business development manager and project manager? What does GCNet do?
All right. GCNet is a public-private partnership. Government owns 35% of the company, and the private sector, EcoBank and SGS SA, that's SGS in Switzerland, they own the remaining 65%. So EcoBank 5%, SGS 60%, and then the government side 35%, which is held by Customs with 20%, the Ghana Shippers Authority 10%, and then GCB Bank 5%. GCNet's mandate, basically what government has asked GCNet to do, is to provide the technology services for Ghana Revenue Authority. And so we provide the customs management system, and then also to provide the TradeNet, which is more like the platform, the single window platform for all the importers, exporters, shipping lines, freight forwarders, ministries, departments, and agencies, so that they can all interact in a transparent and seamless manner with government and also with themselves. And so these systems actually lend themselves to all the operations to provide for transparency and then trade facilitation, as well as revenue mobilization.
Right. What was what was behind the birth of GCNet? Was it? I mean, you said it's a private-public partnership, but was it the government that got to start? We have to address questions of transparency. We have to also be more efficient in the collection of customs and so forth. Where did the brains behind the idea of GCNet come from? Was it an entrepreneur, or was it the government that said we need this?
Okay, I think it was more, it was a mutually beneficial agreement where the Ministry of Trade in the year 2000 was looking at trade facilitation as one of the ways to go. You know, Ghana had come out of all these, was going through a lot of reforms, and trade facilitation was seen as one of the things to do. The second thing was that the private majority shareholder, SGS, which had been in the inspection arena, basically not an IT company, I need to add, was also of the view that Ghana had to move from pre-shipment inspection to more the new customs reform project. And so to be able to do an initiative like that, you just couldn't walk in as a private entity and expect that you'd be able to work with government. And so the need for the public-private partnership came up. And because the focus was customs, we had to let customs own a stake in the business, 20%, just so that then there's a sense of ownership, and that whatever the company was doing was of strategic importance to them. And that's basically the genesis of GCNet. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'm going to move on to the questions that have been put in from the forum now, Carl. And one of them is, could you give us an overview of some of the projects that GCNet is involved in Africa?
Okay, so GCNet as an entity is not directly involved in some project in Africa, but basically the technology we have used through the majority shareholder, we've deployed it in Mozambique, we've deployed it in Madagascar, and the development, okay, so architecture design, platform design, and everything was done by GCNet. In Madagascar, the operation is managed by the former operations manager of GCNet, my colleague, who is now there managing the affairs. So GCNet as an entity, because of the kind of shareholding structure, is not operating it directly, but it's doing it, provided the expertise through the majority shareholder, and it's operating it in Mozambique and Madagascar. There's another operation in Kenya, but to a different extent, not directly what we're doing here in Ghana.
Okay, that's excellent, because that's a question that some people have been interested in. If I could just sort of follow up very briefly, I mean, you mentioned not an area that, from what you mentioned, it's in Mozambique and
Mozambique.
What was the other country? Mozambique and
Madagascar.
Madagascar. Could you see GCNet, I mean, expanding into other areas, other African countries?
Yeah, okay. I think that the potential for GCNet to expand into other countries exists. Indeed, practically almost every customs administration or tax administration has been to GCNet to look at how things are done. Some of the, okay, so corporate governance requirements have made us look at some of these opportunities and turn them down because we have a very strict requirement. But then new opportunities are basically on stream where the company is looking at them. The company is also looking at going into other areas, which is totally different from what we're doing. And so GCNet as an entity, because we are more versatile, we are more IT based, we're not limiting ourselves to just the revenue space. I think that there are other opportunities which we are looking at in other countries.
Okay, that's very interesting, because I mean, I come from a part of Africa, particularly in countries like Somalia and Eritrea. They're very, very weak governance, almost sort of failed states. And the first thing that governments need to get on there, able to provide the very basic services for individual entrepreneurs, revenue collection, and through customs, through the ports, or whatever else is vital. So that's very interesting. I'll move on to the third question, which touches on that, Carl, which is, how is GCNet leveraging technology for revenue generation and collection, and what are the challenges that you face in using technology or leveraging technology for revenue generation and collection?
Okay, and so I think that if you look at countries like Ghana, which are trying to basically move up, okay, no more as Ghana, certainly we are not a developing country, or we are not a poor country, but then we need to go off aid. The only way we can do it is through technology. What GCNet has done is to provide government the different technologies for customs management, okay, which is more for the back end for customs, where they're able to look at all the imports and the exports that are going on, all the customs regimes, including warehousing, transit-free zone. but then also provide the same technology for the importers, exporters, the shipping lines, the freight stations, terminal operators, and the ministries, departments, and agencies. This technology basically helps all these players to be able to interact seamlessly, to be able to move documents, exchange information across the entire spectrum or the entire space. And then also the system allows them to be able to compute the accurate duties and taxes. And so your first challenge when it comes to tax administration is to be able to determine what the correct duties and taxes are with the limited information you have. Now, we have to realize that with this era of trade facilitation, where governments are supposed to move from 100% fiscal examination but depend on the documentation that the importer provides and assume that it is correct. Technology is the only way to go. And so what we provided is the platform for them to be able to do this. Now, GCNet in the year 2010 was also awarded a contract to provide the domestic tax administration system, total revenue integrated processing system. And this computes all the payee tax, income tax, the VAT, basically name all the taxes. And that includes company registration and individual tax. The authority is able to have a single view of the taxpayer right from the customs perspective. The technology is supposed to be doing, and that's what we're using for it. Now, when it comes to trade facilitation, the same system means that the importer does not have to shuffle documents across all the agencies he's supposed to deal with. And so if he requires a permit, he requires an exemption, he requires a license, he's able to submit one entry and the system is able to route it because you have workflow to all the agencies that are supposed to submit this permit license to the importer, and and so that's basically what GCNet has tried to do. Now, when it comes to the revenue side, the system helps customers to be able to compute the revenue. So instead of people doing a man process back, supposed to see exactly where to go and level. So that's basically what we've provided for government.
Well, that brings me to my next point, and I know you wanted to actually combine the question I just asked with the next one that's coming up, because the last question was how do you leverage technology for income sort of revenue generation and collection. What about in terms of, you talked about the platform was aimed at providing transparency or helping the customs and revenue collection in a transparent way for the government. How does it help fight stem corruption and things like that? How does technology and what you do help transparency and help fight corruption?
Okay, so the basic premise for technology is to assume that what the importer is submitting is correct. Okay. And so the importer makes an application I'm using the case of an importer in a particular consignment. The information he sends risk information that could be coming from other sources. And so customs, for instance, will probably be able, the system allows them to look at the importer's previous importations. If he's somebody who's done imports in the past, and the document is coming from, for instance, is one. You also look at the shipping line. You also look at whether the consignment factors the system takes into consideration, and then the risk classification is generated for the importer. And then down through the product chain is gathered as to what has happened. Now, granted, let's assume that, okay, and that's why I like this type of conversation, that the importer is able to take what he claims he was bringing out of the port. He's previous transactions, and we've done it in many cases where they've raised short collections, for instance, and they go back to the station. We had some flags which were raised, and this is what we've identified, and there's a short collection and of finance, and I'm not going to mention the name of the entity, had to surcharge an entity 200 million cedis because they went back, they did a post-event audit on the system because they found out correct activities from taking place. But the second thing is that because the information resides, we have records of information right from day one, you're able to go back and build a particular history of a person and be able to surcharge the person when things go wrong. Now, the other thing that we also do with it,
so it's not as easy to manipulate as the old-fashioned sort of, documents and so forth, because it's technology, because it's digital, because it's on a sort of stored platform. Finding who paid what and who did what is much easier than when it's just files and folders that could easily be manipulated.
That's correct. I mean, if I pick you assume you are in Ghana and I just put in your name in the system, in 5 minutes I'll know every transaction that you've carried out. The system will give me every information on you, and we can actually reconcile it. And so that's what we use the technology for. And I give you another example.
Yeah.
And so we've seen cases where somebody claims, I'm going to warehouse, let's say, iron rods, for instance. And he tells you that the iron rods, which he's going to warehouse, 50 tons, and he gives you the registration details of the vehicle that is going to be used for the warehouse. And the officer confirms it. Now, we did some audits and actually went to check with the driver that was supposed to take only 10 tons. And so what we've tried to do is to link up with the Driver and Vehicle Licensing Authority, so that when you're doing warehousing and ex-warehousing, a particular transaction, the system confirms the allowable weight of the vehicle before it allows you to put your consignment on the truck. And so what the system does then is that, yes, if I'm going to warehouse rice and I say I'm putting 1,000 bags of rice, 50 kilograms each, immediately the system calculates the weight of the rice and tells you that this vehicle cannot carry this amount of rice. And then if the vehicle goes to the warehouse and it's not gated in by the officer, which means that the officer is saying that I have received the consignment of rice in the warehouse. Now, this is a process that ordinarily you'd expect that an officer would want to do, but then sometimes nobody does it. And so the officer takes the ownership. He confirms that the goods have actually landed in the warehouse. So between the port and the warehouse, the consignment have not disappeared. He confirms that he's received 5,000 bags. And then if anything goes wrong, we do an audit and the consignment is not there. It's between the officer and the warehouse owner, because the officer confirmed that he had received 5,000 bags. Right. If he doesn't, the vehicle cannot operate in the port again. The system locks him out. And so those are the ways we use technology to stem cell the corruption.
Wow, wow. And so therefore it's a very, very precise instrument for measuring every section of the process where nothing can, where it knows what's gone wrong and who's not done what they're expected to do.
That's correct. I mean, and what the system does is beyond that, it logs every action that you take. So if I change value from 5 to 10, it logs who did the change, when you did the change, and that information is right from beginning of the transaction till the end. And 20 years down the line, we can still go back and review it. Even though data is supposed to be archived for 7 years, in our system, we don't archive any data. It's all available.
But question 6 from the forum, Carl, I suppose just goes to the heart of what we've been talking about, and I guess it's a wider point, which is what in 5 steps, how can information technology, the digital technology, help African governments and authorities generate revenue and minimize corruption? Where does technology make that difference as a tool that we as Africans didn't have, or our governments didn't have until quite recently?
identify who you're supposed to collect the money from. I mean, if I'm dealing with you, I'm dealing with Theo, for instance. There are no Theo owes me money. I can call Theo and say, Theo, you need to give me this money. But with a taxpayer, the first step is to have a properly deployed identification system for users. Okay, so everybody is a potential taxpayer. Ghana's population is what, 28 million, 29 million, 25 million. The numbers keep moving. Okay, but let's assume it's 25 million. Then the estimation for every country, you're looking at between 35% of the population to be people with income who are supposed to pay tax. In Ghana, we have just 1 million people paying taxes. Okay, so if it's 25%, then technically you're looking at what? Let's say 5 million, 6 million people paying tax, and we have 1 million people paying tax. Rolling out the national ID, which needs to actually be, we need to roll it out to every corner of the country, enroll everybody, and then also move it to the births and deaths so that we can get new, once the child has an ID and the ID lives with the child till he dies, and then you deregister the person. The second thing you want to do is to be able to identify assets, because, excuse me, I'm looking at it from the corruption point of view. If I don't, when somebody becomes corrupt, or when you get ill-gotten wealth, what do you invest them in accounts? You put it in landed property, you put it in assets, so cars. I don't know whether you consider a car an asset, but go spend the money on. And so the technology is supposed to be able to register all these assets. So you can't own a house if you don't have a national, I mean, going forward, or if you own a house, I want to know your national ID. Then your national ID becomes your taxpayer ID, so that I can then reconcile that with your tax payments. And so whether you've paid taxes or not, I'm able to, Ragev or Carl has a house with a $5 million valuation. So then I need to be able to check how much tax has Carl paid in his lifetime. Carl has paid 100,000, 200,000 in his lifetime. There's obviously a big gap. So countries, and that's the way technology is supposed to be used, to go back and then work backwards and find out people's sources of income. I know it's been done in the UK now, where they are trying to find out people's sources of income. Same thing applies, which is I to that time. Again, the individuals also have to go for tax ID, which for me becomes the duplication of ID. If you have ID, so here was, they call it the biometric verification, a BVN, and what it did was, if to all. So what happened was, nobody owned that stake to that you send their pay taxes and then send, so have and have to taxes. You can also, where if you acquire the asset, say let's say 10 years ago, for instance, we're not going to follow up. Going forward, this you have to pay these taxes. Because it's going to link to mobile money, which increasingly is becoming one of the most popular forms of payment or money transactions in Ghana. You can actually start following, generating huge tons of data to people. This breakdown, it probably helps us to be able to arrive at some solution how to use technology to do this.
Carl, that's very interesting. Now, you may have gathered that during the last session, the last forum, a lot of people raised how important the issue of compliance was, and of course, the whole thing about sort of stopping corruption and raising allowing authorities to raise taxes and revenues for government so that it can be spent on, things like health and education. It needs, people and individuals and organizations to comply with it. So the question here that's been asked is, can you shed some light on what the ISACA, I think is called, ISACA is doing in this area?
So at this question, and I'm going to answer it in two. I take more respect. ISACA is interested in standards, and so far we are working with the authority, education, national social that organization have in place the best. So things like protection. These are things that we work on, look and reviewing some of the new policy compliance. But if you compliance in the larger context has a lot to do with enforcement. That I'll not add. Because it's pretty or largest requires would be that meant that for it sometimes it's not about the technology, but it's more about commitment. It will enforce the laws that exist. If you take let's say the tax administration, for instance, if you have a taxpayer and you haven't filed your taxes, there are sanctions that are supposed to be applied. The question is, are we applying the sanctions to the full? Okay, and that's a compliance issue because you cannot get people to be compliant if you don't apply. So I think that this particular question, I looked at it again and I thought that ISACA's remit, yes, we are more technology focused. We're interested in the best practice because we look at frameworks, we look at standards. So things like PCI DSS, business continuity, security, your audit, the frameworks that are supposed to be applied to make sure you get value for money when it comes to technology. We're also interested, also still on the same compliance issue, in a slightly different aspect, particularly government, because I think that government is the biggest and they affect whatever we do. To be able to get the best. It doesn't have to be the most sophisticated, but what is actually appropriate for our circumstances. And so sometimes we have these discussions with government where we point at some of these things. We have discussions with authorities to make sure that they are bringing some of these things to bear. We've taken it a step further where we're working with the civil service and auditor general in some of these issues. So we actually review certain cases for the auditor general. We look at what is going on and then we proffer solutions to it. So that's how we try to help with the compliance issue.
Okay, that's that'll be very, very interesting to people. Okay, we're going to move on, Carl. What do you think of the role? This is another question that has been sent in. What do you think the role of the many IT experts who are in the diaspora, the African diaspora, can be doing to facilitate and help develop the kind of things that you, GCNet, and I'm sure many other companies are doing? So, how can, if there are lots of other Carls, out there from, Ghana or Nigeria or Rwanda, what can they do as technology experts who are in the diaspora to come to help push Africa and specifically Ghana forward? Do they have a role to play by coming back?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, they have a role to play. And I think that my response is that IT is one of the fastest changing professions because technology changes so rapidly that it's difficult for you to think that any one person becomes a store of knowledge. I mean, so we certainly welcome the contributions of the IT experts in the diaspora. The way I look at it is difficult for one person in the diaspora to make a difference. I think that we need to be able to maybe let me answer this and the next question together. I'll put the two of them together. where we need to look at the challenges that Ghana is facing. And so revenue collection, how are other countries where these IT experts, obviously, and I'm sure some of them are working there, able to solve the revenue generation problem. That's one. What technology would work in Ghana, and why would another technology not work? Okay, because you have to look at cultural issues. Are you able to use technology to ameliorate the cultural challenges that we have here, for instance? Or to be able to figure out technology that will work when it comes to literacy levels, which are low. So those type of contributions, obviously, would make a big difference. The other thing is that we should not look at technology that mimics exactly what is done in the West, because educational systems vary. The way the kind of cultural system we have here is different. Political issues also impact the way technology works, because we have to be frank here that sometimes the technology you bring is the best technology, but because of maybe cultural, because of political issues, because of this other issues, for instance, we would not let technology work the way it's supposed to work. And so this kind of expertise and I think engagement will be very apt, where we'll be able to have a forum, okay? And like what we're doing today, for instance, I think that we'll probably need to take it to a larger scale, where we first will be able to sit down and look at all the tenure system, transportation, for instance, and transportation, there's a technology aspect to it, revenue mobilization, which are cut across the ports, the seaports, the domestic tax, even the tolls, district assemblies, all those areas will probably need to be able to have a bigger conversation on it from a perspective and see how to be able to figure it out. And so the IT experts, yes, they have a role to play, and I think that they should definitely. Yeah, if there are any on the platform who are not visiting Ghana, they should be visiting, and let's have a conversation and see how we can move, we can get things done.
Very soon sort of observations, because I mean the takeaway from the points you've made is, of course, Africans in the diaspora working technology have a massive role to play, but it's not just simply taking a technology or a platform or something that works in the West and think about it's just bringing that over to Ghana or wherever it may be and thinking it's going to work, because there's many different issues, many different sensitivities, many different problems and obstacles that exist in Africa that don't exist in the West. But I mean, I'm just wondering, the question I'm coming to.
Yeah. No, before you even ask that question, let me just make a point here. I mean, if you look at the systems we're using, say from the TradeNet perspective and the EMDA, for instance, these same systems actually is what is used in Singapore.
Right.
Okay? But we've had to actually make a lot of changes to suit particular nuances of the Ghanaian importer, the Ghanaian tax administrator, to be work. I mean, there are many changes we've had to do in the system that they don't need out there in Singapore, because generally the compliance levels are very high. People are naturally honest, okay? Sure. And I say that it doesn't, but the system sanctions people. But in our case, for instance, if you leave the system as the way it is, you bring it from the West, it will fail. And we saw that. We saw many things happen simply because either there was collusion, either because the importers naturally are not compliant, and there was no willpower to sanction people. So you need to force the system to be able to do the work of everybody for them. And that's basically why I made that point.
No, I understand that. But the point I was going to come to is that, I mean, for a lot of people listening and watching this forum who may be working in different areas of technology, who may be thinking about, coming back and seeing what they can do to contribute, and also just to create, wealth and create value in their home societies in Africa. Do you think that the one thing about technology in Africa in the last 24 years or 25 years is that it's got the ability to leapfrog, decades of non-development in the state sector? I mean, I'm thinking in particular of the mobile phone revolution, which people like Mo Ibrahim did so much to sort of do. There was no infrastructure by African states on the whole in landlines. Along came this technology, and suddenly it was in the hands of, everybody could afford it. And that's how technology can leapfrog decades of non-development in a way that many other things can't do. Do you think that technology can play a role more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right that I mean, the mobile phone, for instance, is a perfect analogy of how technology has changed everything. Suddenly, everybody potentially has a bank account. I mean, if you look at the traditional banking, for instance, the number of customers, a few, but practically everybody has a bank account with a mobile phone, because most people now, I mean, you pay most people with mobile money. I go out to town to go and buy fried yam, and I use mobile money to pay.
Here, when I went home at Christmas, I barely changed any money. I took some dollars, but of course, I was just using, the same M-Pesa system that, used in Kenya and wherever else to pay, from petrol to whatever else.
Okay, and so the adoption for mobile money, one of the limitations in Ghana as compared to Kenya is the fact that Kenya, everybody speaks Swahili, or they have most of East Africa. Is different because not everybody speaks English, and most apps are developed in English. Yeah, and so one of the things we have to look at is how do we come up with technology that is not language dependent, or it's one Ghana to be able to get to the level that we want. Yeah.
Very good. I think you've kind of answered this next question, which was asked in some ways, which is about sort of mobilizing, talent, how it can be mobilized if we're not already doing so in support of IT developments in different areas and projects. I think you've kind of sort of addressed that in the last couple of points. So I'll move on actually. Now, here's another question, number 10. According to 2018 World Bank report on the ease of doing business and the rankings of the ease of doing business, Ghana dropped 50 places to number 158 out of 190 countries on trading across borders, which is an indicator which may, about how much time and cost to export and import and border compliance and so forth. Does IT play a major role in improving this process of pulling Ghana back in the opposite direction, up 50 places or 60 places? And why is it not happening?
Okay, and so let me just say that this particular ranking basically came up as it came as a shock to many people because we looked at all the. I mean, for us, we had many meetings. It went all the way to the highest level of government, and so it's been looked at seriously. And I think that as a technology provider, for us, we have a bigger interest in it because it brings to people question the systems you've deployed. Why are you not able to make the needed impact? Now we looked at the criteria that was used for this, and the two important ones. Okay, two heavy criteria. Basically, one was on the custom side, and which was particularly looking at the clearance of spare parts. Now, if you look at spare parts in Ghana, and so you look at my response, I made some suggestions. Spare parts in Ghana, because the majority of vehicles, when it spares for cars of vehicles that are imported into Ghana, are second-hand. Okay, obviously you are going to have a higher failure rate. Excuse me. A lot of vehicles are going to fail because it's more expensive for a potential car buyer to get a new car than an old car because of the kind of tax system we have here. We pay more for new vehicles. And so the spare parts importers, when you go to a lot of the places where they import spare parts, basically travel to, say, Dubai, China, UK, they go to the where they break up the vehicles, and they just lump all spares together into a container. It's difficult for customs to clear these things just with a click of a button, because a lot of the time, for such transactions, they will have to do physical inspection, which requires that all the containers are opened, or they take a percentage of a number of containers. So if you bring 10 containers, they are going to inspect 2 or 3, for instance, to make sure that it is what it is. And they have to unstuff the containers, count all the different items in a container and put it back. There's no way your ranking is going to improve when it comes to something like this particular ranking. Government has looked at it, and government before they came to power, basically have made certain commitments that they're going to look at the spare part regime, for instance, and bring relief to spare parts. And so, I think that the spare parts importers, for instance, the tax practically no tax on spare parts for vehicles and stuff like that to help reduce the cost. But then what it also does is that there's still a risk because traditionally, we know most people will look at consignments that say are zero rated duty, for instance, and then they'll put items that are supposed to be inspected in there. And so what technology is supposed to do, and what we're working on here together with other partners, is to be able to improve on the risk selectivity. So you look at the risk of the consignment, and then you are targeting them. And so if for not all of them, for some of them, you would probably determine that out of 10 transactions, you open one just to make sure that things don't slip through the net. The other thing has to do, and that's more my suggestion, is for government to look at the tax regime. Let's incentivize people to buy brand new cars. It does two things. Immediately, I think that if you look at countries like Rwanda has a penalty for buying cars older than 5 years. I think that the same thing applies in Mauritius. Also look at doing that. Encourage more people to buy new cars. Then what happens with the spare parts? Spare parts that are bought for new cars normally come differently because you notice that if I'm buying a door for a new car, the door has to be stuck in a particular way so that it doesn't get damaged. And so it's easy for customs to inspect those ones. And that's what is helping all the other countries in Africa that are doing better than us in that regard. The second thing that also brought Ghana down, has to do with the registering your business. And not from the Registrar General's perspective, but the business registration permit, which has to do with the Accra Metropolitan Authority. We looked at it and we found out that the Accra Metropolitan Authority has a separate process. And so after you've done your business registration with the Registrar General, you have to go to Accra Metropolitan Authority, and then they'll give you, you have to apply for a permit, which could take days before they'll come and inspect your premises. Now, we looked at Rwanda. Why is Rwanda doing well? What Rwanda does is, if you apply for business registration, they give you a provisional license. So the license is given to you the same day or the next day, and you can open your bank account, you can do whatever transactions you want. And then the other activities, so we call it like the post-event activities, inspect the business premises inspection and all that. They take their time to come to your premises to inspect it, to make sure it is where it is. Unfortunately, we're not doing that in Ghana, but this time the AMA, is actually, which I'm working with them on that one, it's agreed to allow the business registration for the AMA to be part of the Registrar General process. So you do one registration at Registrar Generals, and the system automatically sends the same information to the Accra Metropolitan Authority, and then they can give approvals. We've also suggested that they should do post-event, so they can give provisional and then take their time to.
Okay, so I think we're just having a little communications issue. I don't know if you can still hear me. Are you there?
Sorry, I think that I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so have you finished, Carl? Shall I move on to the next question? Sorry, I can't really. Okay, let me move on to the next quick question. What savings, approximate savings, do we, take traditional methods of collection? So how much comes in as a result? What difference does the technology make?
I'm just going to disconnect and then I'll connect.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me. I can hear you.
Carl is back up online.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah. Okay, can you hear me, Raghav?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry, a call came through, and so I lost the conference call. I lost.
Okay, don't worry.
Yeah.
The question was how what difference does the technology in terms of the sort of the money that's compared to
No, can you repeat your question?
what the question is, I mean, what difference does things, you know, that's being attained by using technology and over and above the traditional methods of collection?
Okay. What difference is it? The what approximate savings that we made?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that if you look at the when GCNet was rolled out, or when GCNet started, I think that the first year we had more than 50% revenue collection over the previous one. I think that on a year-by-year basis, the targets that are set by customs tends to be more than it's normally about 25 to 30% more than the previous year. Import volumes have not grown up significantly, and so we think that it's more to do with the technology that's been deployed. That's one, plus the fact that we have a lot more stricter controls in the system. So locally, they are looking at matching different records, plus the fact that there's increased acceptance of the system, and so hitherto transactions that were performed outside the system, we've also rolled it into the system for domestic action. It's the savings. If we look at the collection, when the targets are set, we have also brought about a reduction in the number of exemptions, and that is taking example of clearance on permit, which was is a facility, or it's a privilege. Actually, let me call it. It's more a privilege than a facility that an importer could enjoy. Basically, clear your consignment without paying the duties and taxes. And what they did was to leave a deposit of some sort. The understanding is that you come back and perfect the transaction. And what people were doing was that they were not coming back to do it. And so we had to put in place measures to block the import and for transactions. And so if we want to look at the quantity, for instance, quantum, I think on a year-by-year basis, we don't do anything less than 25% of the previous year. And I think that it's largely a good testament of what the system can do. We think that the 25% is still small. And I'm looking at it in total and customs. Government interference, which does happen. Okay, let's not delude ourselves. There's interference, and that has to also change. We also think that, and so let me not use the government. It's more political interference. Okay, and then we also have to look at bringing other players as well, because there are other players who are outside the system that we need to bring in. I think that the revenue will probably go up.
Okay, that's great. That's very interesting. I suppose the one thing everyone will sort of want to know who's taking part in our session, Carl, is that I mean, what's the evidence that we know that.
Okay, Raghav. And so I believe your question is the evidence of the benefits of revenue collection. And I think that what it does is, I mean, I think I probably answered that in this particular previous question, where I said revenue. But let me just give you an example, okay, of exports. For instance, we had to deploy a solution for the central bank. And basically what that solution did was to be able to just similar to what I talked about, clearance on permits, do same for exporters. There was no mandate for exporters to bring their money in, even though they technically had to complete what we call the letter of commitment for the central bank and all the other banks. And what this technology was doing for them was that for an exporter, the system required you to complete your details, and so it's asking for your bank account details. Obviously, we respect the data protection laws, and so you put in your bank account details, and your bank actually has to confirm that you are, yes, valid exporter, and the account was valid, and that account received remittances of your export. And so the custom system will then look at the transaction you're processing, and then based on, if you say you're supposed to remit $1 million worth of cocoa export, for instance, after 60 days, the system automatically sends an alert to the bank that's supposed to receive the remittance, and also sends the same alert to the central bank. The central bank does that follow-up. Now, when we did that deployment, within, I think in less than 4 months, okay, we had the central bank proceeds that came in had gone up more than 50%. Okay, and that's something that technology has done. We immediately saw the export remittances go up drastically. I haven't followed up on the stats, but I know it's gone up much, much more than I'm giving you. What we're working on with the tax administration, so customs and the central bank, is to apply it to all export commodities, because you need to do that for every export to be able to bring in the remittance that the country requires, and then afterwards the importer can take his money anywhere. And so that's what we've done. But I think that on a year-by-year basis, we've done not less than 25%. I think that that's significant. Yeah, Raghav, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. No, that's really that's really interesting. So on the whole, what do you are about the use of technology in
the informal sector?
Revenue for yeah, it's a positive. But you're, just to clarify this point, you think the evidence so far of the benefits of revenue collection is positive?
You know, if I want to push myself, I think that we can do much better here. I think that and maybe this particular one is not on the question list, but you have to look at the fact that Ghana, for instance, the vice president announced the paperless project, for instance. You see, we're not interested only in the revenue mobilization, but you also have to look at the trade facilitation aspect. Now, the technology has always existed. It's just that nobody was, there was no champion for it. And so what the government decided to do was that we're going to own it, and we're going to make sure that we go paperless in the port. That has been done. We did a review a couple of weeks ago, and we noticed that things are going back to the status quo. So the technology has been done, and that's the case for many of the deployments that have been done. And it's not only with the revenue agencies, but I think that many sectors. And so when I say that I think we can do better, I think I'm looking at it from that context. So what we're required to do is, beyond the technology providers, I think that the project owners need to own these projects. And a lot of the time, I think that they see it more as an operational tool instead of a strategic tool. And I think that that's the conversation that we're having to make them see the strategic importance of the technology that's been deployed. And I think that the minute we come to that realization, we'll probably see a lot more benefits from the deployed systems. From a technology perspective, I really don't think that you need more technology. I think that it's more they use the system to its fullest, and I think that we'll get the benefits thereof. So the informal sector, I think that you want me to answer that?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay, I think that the informal sector is a tricky one to deal with, and I alluded to some challenges early on, where I said that if you look at how do you tax the illiterate peasant farmer, for instance? Okay, the farmer has to pay a certain amount of tax. They sell their produce, how you're able to do it. In places where they've succeeded in doing that, and I think I looked at the Tanzania case, for instance, and I looked at Kenya and Rwanda, for instance, because I like to look at the African places, and then India to some extent, because there's common language. It's easy to be able to roll out solutions to them, and some of those ones are fixed amounts, and so irrespective of your revenue, there's a fixed amount, particularly for the informal sector. That has to be looked at, and I know that discussions for that. Government has started, and I think that the AC technology, they want to roll out the electronic point of sale for practically all shops, but that's more shops. Going beyond shops, I know the district and metropolitan assemblies levy, and that is fraught with challenges. And I haven't investigated the challenges, but when you go for meetings, that is what you are told. And so I'm not saying it based with any evidence. I don't have any evidence to that effect. But what I know is that we are supposed to be able to link all the district and metropolitan assemblies to a common system where suddenly these systems are interfaced with the taxpayers, or the end users' cell phone, so that every transaction they do, they get notification. And so if a trader pays a certain amount of tax in a market, for instance, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, they get a notification that this is how much tax you've paid. So if the tax collector is not putting the money into the system and moving it somewhere, they get to know, because they are not going to get that notification. Those discussions are ongoing. I think it's going to take a while, but I'm pretty certain that we would get there in the next couple of years. The challenge is widening the tax net, which I mentioned earlier on, where we have more than 7 million people who are not paying tax. And I think that is a big sector that has to be looked at. And that's primarily because majority of these people are in the informal sector. So it's a task that is not easy. It's going to be difficult, but I don't think it's anything that maybe a conversation where we talked about the expertise of people in the diaspora and all those places. I think that this is a particular challenge that we can all together sit down and see how we can solve it. Yeah.
And in terms of, you said you looked at other sort of countries and their sort of systems. Where do you think Ghana's or standards rate when you compare them to the other countries that you've been looking at?
Okay, it's interesting. Now, when you look at the formal sector, the systems we've deployed in Ghana, I mean, I think that is rated higher than most systems. That's the interesting thing, because systems we've deployed here, if you take the custom side, is rated among the best. If you take the domestic tax, it's rated among the best. However, when it comes to the informal sector, we have a big problem. The formal sector systems which I talked about, the problem we have is the inability to go beyond the formal or the easily identifiable taxpayers, for instance. I'll give you an example. That's more than 200,000 companies have registered for tax ID. But unfortunately, the tax administration has not rolled them out and assigned them tax offices. Now, I'm a technology person, and I don't see why we should give them tax officers. I think that the system should be able to automatically do it. But we have processes where we want to still stick with the manual way of doing things by manually assigning them tax officers. And so what you're doing here is that you have 200,000 potential taxpayers who are not paying tax. And if it takes you 2 years to assign them tax officers, they've gone away with 2 years tax. Okay, and so those are some of the challenges that we have. So it is not for lack of technology, but it is more a change issue, and then somebody cracking the whip to get things done. And it comes back to the strategic importance we associate with whatever technology we have in place. That's more the crust of the issue.
Right. Now on the floor, someone's asking a very specific question about GCNet. Actually, what has GCNet made to make life easier for its customers?
GCNet's customers are many. Okay, government side, who are a primary customer, and then you also have the importing and the shipping community. And I think that if I look at the government sector, what we want is, what will make GCNet's life easy is for the project owner. Okay, we want a project owner, because the minute you have a project owner, it makes whatever work you do, well, they basically own whatever deployment you do, and it gets to be used effectively, and you're able to fix the whatever challenges they have. If the project owner doesn't use the system to its maximum, it's very difficult for you to continue innovating. And I think that that's for you to innovate, you need to be able to get to see the work you've done being used effectively. On the other side, if you look at the other players who are the end users, so importers, the shipping lines, and so forth, I think that for them, the challenge, and it's come up in several meetings, is more the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy has to be taken out of the process. So if you take the port, for instance, where you probably have national security operatives who would stop everybody and to look at their consignment, even though technically they're not supposed to be there. You would have Bureau of, okay, you have the National Security Narcotic Control Board. Narcotic Control Board is also involved, but then instead of being part of the inspection, we'll probably wait and ask importers to bring papers. Okay, and this comes back to the point I made about the paperless process, where we are not seeing the full benefits because people are going back to the status quo. These are the challenges that we think that if government cracks the whip, and the project owner owns it and cracks the whip, the end users at the end of the day would better appreciate what systems have been deployed, and will be able to see a better throughput, and people would be happier in the ports. That's more the perspective I come from.
You've talked a lot, and very interestingly, Carl, about the challenges of technology in Africa. Of course, specifically the services that GCNet sort of provides. But let me ask you, I mean, in the diaspora, maybe coming back, governments have varying levels of transparency and huge amounts of bureaucracy, challenges, all kinds, linguistic, cultural, all sensitivities. Do you think it's easy? Not easy, but there's money to be made in technology in Africa.
Rocket, I think that technology there's money to be made in technology. I mean, if you're irrespective of where you're coming from, there's technology there's money to be made, and it depends on the kind of technology you roll out. Okay, and let me put it that way. People have come with technology that has failed simply because they did not understand the nuances of the market, or so of the end users. I've seen a lot of people make a lot of money through the new apps that come from mobile, and people have made money. Others have failed horribly, because I've seen apps that nobody has ended up using. And so the key thing is trying to understand what works in Ghana. And I mentioned it earlier on that just because it works in the West doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work here. We need to understand that particular paradigm shift. Hello, Raga.
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, no, I'm just.
Yeah, okay.
There's another very specific question that has come in, which is, I suppose, someone who's interested. If about their shipment, how can they find out online? How accessible is it? Where can they go into this system? And say, okay, here's the information you need as an importer about your shipment.
Okay, so here's the thing. The custom system that we've deployed actually allows you to be able to determine at every stage where your consignment is, what you're supposed to pay as an importer, what stage it is, who is holding on to it. Practically all the information, it's available. One of the challenges in Ghana is that the clearance is done by registered agents, and so customs licenses brokers to be able to do that. And so in a lot of cases, the importer doesn't get to know what is happening down the line.
Right.
But on our website, for instance, it allows you to be able to track your consignment if you know your bill of lading, if you know your customs declaration number. And I think that we use that. People have called me many times, and I've pointed it out to them. And we continuously do awareness. We do adverts in the papers. Sadly, a lot of time, well, I don't know, we'll probably have to look for a more effective way of getting people to know. Mm-hmm. But one of the challenges, and which we're trying to solve, is When an importer has come to do a transaction, particularly for those in the diaspora, because they give it out to the agent, we have no way of reaching out to the actual importer because we don't have the importer's contact detail. What we have is the agent's details. So assuming you're doing a transaction, I'm clearing a transaction for somebody's clearing for me. My tax ID, I need to give my correct phone number. Most times we don't have the system, we don't get the correct phone numbers. We did an exercise a couple of weeks ago and we picked 200 IDs and the corresponding phone numbers and we called. It was only 15 phone numbers, 15, that were correct. The rest were all not correct. They were correct phone numbers, but they were landline, okay? There's no way the system will be able to send you a text notification of the status of your entry if we're getting a landline, for instance, as your contact number. We also ask for email addresses, and we don't get email addresses, or the email addresses we get belong to the agent who is provided the transaction. And so what we've done is moving a lot of this information online for the importer to be able to go himself. You put in your declaration number, which sometimes the agents are reluctant to share with you because of what we find is that agents will tell you that, oh, there's a problem with customs or customs is doing this, and sometimes in many cases they haven't even started working on your transaction. And so we know that is a frustration, and we're still working on how to be able to bridge that gap. I mean, there are some other stuff that have maybe somewhere down the line I'll share it on this platform. People can look at it and then they'll be able to track their consignments. I think that probably is another way of helping those on this platform. But then we're looking at it in a bigger picture to solve everybody's problem.
Okay, and like I said, you answered it very well. I mean, in terms of the importer and the interface of the agent, you know, coming between, you know, GCNet and but rules. If you want, what are your, you know, responses and the duties on you as, you know, agent or an you know, an importer or whatever, you know, where is all the sort of the rules and regulations of customs? Are they easily findable online in a concise way?
Yeah, I think the rules and regulations of customs are found online in a concise way. I think that that is there on if you go to the customs website, on the GCNet website as well. We've tried to provide that information, and then the other technical partner also has that information available on their website. And so in many cases we are trying to put this information because it is still, it goes back to affecting the ease of doing business. If I can't find information, I can't transact business easily. And so we put all this information on the platform where you can search for that information. I know we're working on some other stuff like mobile apps that you can just use, and it gives you a lot of this information and it walks you through the process. Yeah. So that is also stuff that is available.
So do you see a day where, you know, GCNet and in Ghana and hopefully, you know, this kind of technology will go on to other African countries, will be in a state where, you know, like Amazon in the West, or like you know, you can just leave that efficient? Is that the aim? Hello, Carl. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yes, I got your question. I think that we're trying to look at GCNet and compare it to Amazon, where at the end of one day a user will be able to just go online, you import your products.
I'm just thinking, is that the end line? Is that where you'd like to get to?
That's exactly, you know, the predictability in the process. Hello?
Yeah, just the question here, how did the organization or the company GCNet come into existence?
How did GCNet come into existence? I think that GCNet came into existence, it was a government initiative. So government and SGS in Ghana had a discussion, and Ghana was looking at transitioning from the pre-shipment inspection to destination inspection. But destination inspection also needed a new customs management system where there was reliability, and also the implementation of the trade net. And so there was a visit to Singapore, looked at what Singapore was doing to be able to move Ghana to the level that everybody was comfortable with. And that's how come GCNet was born. And so basically what happened was SGS then had to look for other partners. So you have the public-private partnership. Then the only entities that express interest are those that are on board. That's Shippers Authority, EcoBank, GCB. Customs, we had to make them become partners because of the whole investment was going to be done for customs. And at the time, nobody really wanted to do any work with customs, because people were not too comfortable. So it was more of a risk, but when it was a risk that has paid off so far.
Okay, that's good to know. Another question coming in, Carl. Are there other competitors to GCNet? Is there competition to you?
Okay, so if we want to look at competition, if we look at the entire spectrum of what GCNet is doing, no, we don't have competition. But the specific areas, okay, and so from a contractual perspective, GCNet was supposed to do valuation and risk management, for instance, but government, in its wisdom, decided that another entity had to do it. And so, yes, so that entity is doing it. GCNet is not doing valuation and risk management. So we don't see that entity as a competitor. Because in actual fact, our systems are interfaced. We have a seamless interface between ourselves and the other entity, which is West Blue, and now Dubai Customs, Dubai World Customs, Dubai Customs. But I don't know what the real name is now. So we have that interface, yeah, and we have our meetings and we get work done.
And how quickly is this technology looking at moving into different areas and different sort of applications of the platform? Is the technology sort of moving rapidly year by year? I mean,
the technology is actually moving. Yeah, the technology is moving very fast. I mean, it's basically now what you have. If you take the customs administration side, for instance, practically we're moving everything to mobile. So the officers are using a lot more tablets to do their work. And there are some office functions that are more back-end, but a lot of the inspections and so forth are done on the tablet. Temporary vehicle side, for instance, is tablet. Warehousing is tablet-based, and that's where we are reaching now.
And tell me about the other business. Tell me about the other business sectors that that GCNet is looking into to move into.
Well, I think that GCNet's interest in all the other sectors. We've done a lot of work for. We're doing some EHMIS work, and so we've done development and for the health sector. And what we're looking at is, I think we're looking even at technology for what's the name of that? There's something we call for, let's say. Sorry, I've forgotten the medical term. But when you have, let's say, like Ebola, for instance, those type of things for reporting of those things, and that's one of the things that is missing in Ghana. And so we're working in that sector.
Infectious diseases kind of thing.
Yeah, infectious disease reporting, and so you need to be able to have systems for that particular sector. So we've had several roundtables. We've developed a technology for that, and we're still looking at working with the Ghana Health Service and the ministry to be able to roll it out. Roll it out to all these places, yeah.
And in terms of software engineers or platform engineers, I don't know what you describe them. Are they mostly Africans, or are you getting talent from different parts of not just the continent but outside? Who's helping you develop?
Yeah.
Technology?
Okay.
Is it African talent or beyond?
Some of the technology, we have technical partners in Singapore for certain aspects, so we get development. But a lot of the development on the custom side we do in-house in Ghana, and we have our own staff. And then we also outsource to companies. We have IT companies in Ghana that are doing development for us on even the custom side and also on the e-health side, for instance. And so GCNet is not, we don't restrict ourselves, but as much as possible. And the new vision what we to do development for us. So we look for companies that have the requisite expertise that we want, yeah, and then we outsource. There's no point in trying to build a big development wing because you are not going to be nimble. We leverage on the technical partners who will be able to do that for us, and then we work with them.
Just speaking wider, question. I mean, how much help train young Ghanaian men and women, in this kind of technology? Is it, if I mean, I was recently in Israel, for example, with leading sort of, technology nations on earth, and has built it up, in the last 10 years. Are there the programs, the courses, to computer engineers and
Okay. Most of the stuff we use for our development, we pick them from the universities here. I mean, basically, we expect, let's say, if it's networking, it's we have training that will bring them up to the level that we want. For developers, we do the same thing. And increasingly, what we're doing to do some outsourcing for certain skills which we don't have in-house, and get people to be able to bring this expertise on board quickly. Now, I've engaged with a lot of universities, and I know that the discussion is on industry, and here we're looking more at the IT side to look at what specifically would be able to, or what impact we want them to have on the businesses. And so last week, for instance, when I was at the University of Ghana, one of the things that came up is a lot more engagement between industry. Here I'm talking IT, so organizations like GCNet and academia on the new trends, so that they'll be able to bring the students up to the speed we want before they even come out of the institutions. The other thing is also that we try to do is to have internships. And so we get students from the universities and they do internships with us. We engage with the faculty and we tell them what our observations are and the kind of things we want them to get the students up to. And I think that so far, GCNet as an organization, we're about 220 people, all mostly very young people, and all of them are from the universities in Ghana. And I think that has been working largely well, is working well for us. Not all of them are in IT because we have other people, we have people doing other things. But from the IT side, I think that it's working well. It's not an end in all. We invest significant resources on training to be able to get them to do what we want them to do. And so that I think that it's a bit of stuff that works well for us. Yeah.
You do quite a bit, not only of training, but as you said, internships and that kind of stuff to try and bring young Ghanaians.
Yeah.
Okay. In the area of technology, as a culture in Africa, you can go into technology. I mean, like you did in the 90s. How do we make that more possible, as societies? Because one of the different people to and open the door to technology or an interest in technology to school kids, not just the continent.
Okay, I think that technology, I mean, if you look at technology now, and practically everybody is interacting with technology in one form or the other. And the one that comes most to mind is the cell phone. What I know, okay, and I use my children's school, for instance, and my daughter, who is 10 years old, is doing, she's programming with Scratch. She's programming with Scratch. And so she's able to do some stuff which I find interesting. I didn't know about Scratch because I've stopped doing programming a long time ago. But I think that the government also has a role to play with this. And technology now is not a luxury anymore. It is a necessity. And so apart from education, we also need to have technology being forced down the throat of everybody. And when I say force, we want to talk about, let's say, the trader, for instance. You want to take shops, for instance. where suddenly government has to encourage them to use a particular type of technology to say for payments. Okay, so their customers come and they are doing payments. And so and that, for instance, probably has an impact on the central bank, because then they are doing a lot more cashless transactions, but you're able to monitor those ones. It creates an ecosystem where there will be a lot more developers who will be required, because people certainly see opportunities that do not hitherto exist. When those opportunities come and people start taking it, it also brings about education, because then educators see the need to be able to come up with all sorts of training programs to be able to take care of those captive markets. And so it's a conversation that is not just cannot be answered from one perspective. You have to look at it from a bigger picture and to be able to get it sorted out. That's I like to answer it from this perspective.
Okay, Carl, that's very useful. My last question. It's been a fascinating listening to you talk about GCNet and the wider issue of technology in Africa and all its uses. I suppose my last question is what can we do? You know, people, you know, members of this kind of forum, you know, in this kind of session. You know, we're all over the world. I'm speaking to you from Beirut. You're in Accra. You know, Teddy and lots of other people are in London and United States. You know, what do you think? You know, networking. You know, Africans from around the world to come and discuss these issues and problems that confront us, and how technology or media or engineering, whatever it is, kind of things are useful. We do.
Well, I think that, Raghav, the question you ask is a very relevant one. I don't think we have enough conversations on what technology can do for us. And I'm sorry to say it, but if I follow a lot of the social media stuff, you go to Facebook, you look at tweets, what you see is a lot more negative issues, people always finding fault. And I think that it should rather focus on how do we come up with constructive, okay, so you can pick an issue and come up with suggestions as to how technology can solve these things. Let me just tell you that you'll be surprised that government actually listens to what people come up with. If we have constructive suggestions for these things, government would adopt it. And I think that that's what I like about this. You have a lot more people coming with open solutions, and people are open-minded, and we actually discuss this thoroughly. I think that, and I was discussing with one of the members of this platform, that we need to probably even have a public discourse one day where we can pick certain areas of government where we think technology can impact, invite government and show them exactly what we can do. And I tell you, government is definitely going to take it. Because I work with government, you sit with government and you come up with solutions, and government accepts it. And I think that we can take it beyond this.
That's really interesting, because I mean, it's a kind of Afro-pessimism from within us as Africans sometimes, because we're so negative about governments and people in authority that they're not willing to do this. They're you know, they're stuck in the mud. But you're saying that actually, if you really come with solutions in a positive way, governments in Africa will be there, you know, to get help.
No, I'm 100% sure of that, because okay, for the past, since 2002, I've been working with government, and every time you sit with government, you come up with solutions, they adopt it. And so I really don't think that it is because we don't come with solutions. If you don't come with solution and somebody else comes with a solution, don't go with the person's solutions, whether the solution works or not, because we have to understand that not everybody in government is technology biased. A lot of people in government actually don't understand what the technology is supposed to do. And so if we go out and we see fancy it, we need to come up and sit down with government, have that public conversation, and actually proper solutions. And you know, in proffering the solution, we're not just proffering solutions, but we're coming up with proposals that look at cost. It tells them the length of time it takes to deploy, the benefits they're supposed to get. And I tell you that a lot of the time, even if government doesn't have money, it's something to earmark for implementation at a later date.
Carl, thank you very much indeed. It's a great end on sees Africa, but sometimes I think we ourselves as Africans can sometimes be guilty of pessimism in our own way, about what's happening. But it's really interesting to hear, how technology can help us resolve some of the big issues like revenue, like, income generating, because without that, we can't move forward as Ghana, but also as society. So I want to thank you for your time on this Sunday evening, Carl.
Thank you,
Sackey
Raga.
of GCNet, to Theo, to Teddy in for and thank you very much indeed. So I'll sign off. I don't know if Theo wants to jump in or not, but just a big thank you to you, Carl, for taking the time. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. I just think that I've enjoyed this session. I know GCNet has not, we can't say that we've done everything, but we've tried and we intend to do more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been such a wonderful discussion tonight. We thank you all so much. Thank you, Ragged. Thank you, Carl, for your time. Wishing that you were closer. Sorry about the technical issues that we had. Of course, we're working from 3 different countries across the world. So we are obviously working to different bandwidths and time zones and all sorts of complications, but we're still working on how to ensure that we don't have any of these issues as we go along on other sessions as well. We hope that you have had some sort of information that would help you to make the right decisions in terms of your businesses, and you've taken away a lot of information. Networking is one of the main things that we want to do on the forum. Therefore, if you have any issues in terms of shipments, you know who to contact. In case you also are not aware, like it was said by Carl, you can go online, track your shipments. If you need to import items, you can also check online, find out how much it costs, how long it's going to take you. Is that right, Carl? Can we check and find out how much it's going to cost and all those details online?
Basically, you get an estimate. You won't be able to get a 100% figure, because depending on the product, there are different types of licenses that you probably might have to get. But for the typical consignment, the figure you get will be more than 95% accurate.
Okay, all right. And also, depending on the items, as you have just mentioned, for example, are there any specific taxes for example, cars that are 5-year-old or beyond 5-year-old? Are there any specific higher taxes, for example?
No, I mean, if you look at the tax regime we operate in Ghana, say for cars, it is clear cut. Okay, so you know that if it's more than 5 years, for instance, this is the depreciation that takes place. Where the challenge is for most people is the way, tax is calculated on vehicles, because we calculate based on the manufacturer's suggested retail price. And I know that I've seen comments on this platform where people have critiqued that, but that's the way. It's not done only in Ghana. I think Ghana is one of the countries that does it. Other countries do it differently, but that's the tax regime we implement in Ghana. And it is because of the narrow tax net that we have. I'm pretty sure that will come down. Cars make up almost 30% of tax revenue for customs. And so it is a big revenue maker for government. And it's going to be difficult for us to tell government to reduce it if we don't widen the tax net. And so it's definitely going to come. Yeah.
Oh.
But you can calculate it.
Oh, okay. So you can calculate it directly. And also, one question that Rage asked you, which I'd like to re-emphasize on, was to do with our health system, our health services. Knowing how poor it is, I'm sure majority of the reasons why they're facing all the challenges is to do with the way technology has been implemented in our hospitals and clinics. Is GCNet part of the team that will be working on redeveloping the health sector's technological systems?
Okay, GCNet at the moment, we're not, okay. We've developed some software, health management information system, which we are working with some partners so GIZ and GRA and a few other partners. We are having discussions with National Health Insurance, who have looked at it, Ghana Health Service, and then there's another institution. And they've looked at it. And so we are trying to basically roll it out. And what that is supposed to provide is all hospitals, a lot of the hospitals that sign up to it, the ability to be able to get patient information, but also epidemic type information, so you can actually follow through on those ones. But as a whole, from the health sector, we are very silent on that place. It's not a place that we are in. We are now making some approaches into that sector.
Oh, okay. Are there any timelines to that? Because it's something that is very.
I think that before the end of next year, you definitely will have a big announcement. But actually, let me say before the end of this year, we'll make an announcement.
Oh, thank you very much. And Rage, one last question. It's in terms of Ghana and Somaliland, are there any similarities in these challenges that we've been discussing?
Well, I mean, there are some similarities. I mean, but it's Ghana is in a very and more, advanced situation than Somaliland finds itself. I mean, the one thing that is good about Somaliland is that even though it's a very small and unrecognized, country, it has maintained, 28 years of peace and stability and 4 democratic, peaceful transfers of power, one after the other. And that's something you rarely find in a lot of parts of Africa, and certainly not true of the Horn of Africa. You just look at, most people know about Somalia, which has been, in a disastrous, conflict and civil war for 28 years. But Somaliland is, I mean, one of the things that Carl was mentioning is just the role that technology can play in vital areas. I mean, one of the reasons that, it's held democratic elections is that Somaliland became the first country in Africa just this last year to hold an election using biometric data. So in order to stop voter fraud, everyone, when they went to get their polling cards, they registered with iris scans and the fingerprints of your fingers. It's like, when you arrive at the airport in the United States, it's the same technology. And of course, you turn up and, we're talking about very rural areas where before someone could pose as their cousin or this person or that person and vote many times. It completely did that away. And, this is a democracy in a very fragile part of the world where, as I say, there have been conflicts. So if there is a similarity, it's the realization that, technology, when it can be adapted, as Carl was saying, to the local sensitivities and the local customs and things, can work absolutely brilliantly. But, we're a long way, ahead in terms of the business applications that is so desperately needed. I mean, Somaliland is very wealthy in natural resources. There's a British company that's drilling for oil this year, and things are looking very good. There's lots of sort of, minerals, which is an area that, Ghana is very experienced in. We need expertise and help in that. There's a huge role, I think, that the private sector in Ghana, having, had 50, 60 years head start, can help, in Somaliland. So hopefully, we'll do a session or two where I can answer some questions about Somaliland, familiarize the kind of, Ghanaian expertise there, and hopefully one day sort of arrange people to come and see Somaliland and, work with, entrepreneurs there, because it's a very, very entrepreneurial society. That's the other thing about it.
Wonderful. It's so good to have an insight about other African countries so that we can compare, because sometimes we take what we have for granted and we don't appreciate it that much. Another area that we're looking at is also where we can learn from each other, so that areas that we probably haven't ventured into, or things that we haven't actually thought about, hopefully being together we'll be able to bridge that gap and make things even much better as it is.
Well, it's been very educational for me, actually, Teddy, because I mean, I spoke with the newly elected president of Somaliland. I mean, I was there at Christmas, and you know, Ethiopia, not so much Ethiopia now, because that's really it's sort of exploding economically, but certainly the sort of Somalia, you know, Sudan, Somaliland area has lived off aid, you know, because it's been so lots of other things. And the one thing that current president said to me is that, you know, he would swap all the aid that Britain get for human resources, you know, the UK and showed how to collect. You don't have to rely on sort of aid. You know, the wealth is there, but the means of collecting, a culture is developed among Somaliland business. But I'm not paying any taxes. So it's very interesting hearing government revenue. Because your dependence on aid, you know, you don't need to look to what the European Union or whatever else is giving you. If you can generate vital area from you know, Carl, you know,
yeah,
what he's been
saying
tonight. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Okay, sorry, you know, the line was breaking, but the point I was making was that I think that picking up on some of the stuff I got from you, the fact that we have a lot of resources, we have the technology, and I think that what we need to do is to be able to create that environment where we leverage on what we've already deployed and what is best for our society, okay, and to be able to get the best out of it. Yeah, we are doing it to some extent, but I don't think we're doing it effectively. That's more from my point of view.
Interesting, very interesting, very interesting times. It's amazing the sort of things that we come up with in terms of having these discussions, and that's why it's going to be ongoing. We'll hopefully have bi-weekly sessions going on. The idea is to, apart from it being very informative and also giving us, making us more knowledgeable, of course, it also opens up other areas like that we haven't probably thought about, so that we can work on as a group. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. I'm just wondering, Carl, one last question. In fact, it's not a question, it's just something that I've been thinking about. The reason why, because most of the discussions that we've been having on the forum has been around education, right? Now, education is because the government, one of the main agenda for the government, which was brilliant, fantastic, was to bring all the children back into school, which is to do with the free schools, right? Now, the problem that occurred, which was obvious, was that we had a huge influx of children off the streets into the schools. The problem was now we haven't got enough teachers trained to be able to educate these children. Some of the things that has transpired from our discussions is the fact that if we can train the teachers so that they'll be able to train the children themselves. One of the big discussions that held that was the Ghanaian teacher that drew that computer. Yeah, for example. Now, since you've been working with the government in these areas in terms of IT, has there been any discussion in terms of being able to use a facility to be able to, IT facility to be able to train the teachers? How can we help?
So last week Thursday, I happened to deliver the keynote address at the University of Ghana, the 70th anniversary. And we're looking at IT, leveraging on IT to be able to bring accessibility, innovation, and there's something else, okay, I've forgotten. And one of the key things was that to IT for all of them. But do you really need to be able to deploy technology in all those places? Some of the lectures, for instance, can be done remotely, because you have he thousands is in the conferencing facilities and is able to teach. And so technology can be used to do that. Now, I also think that if you use the example of this particular guy, I think that we need to have a discussion again as to how we are deploying, that's free communication, which is funded by the telcos, and their mandate is supposed to bring innovation into a conversation about how they come up with their plans, because we probably need to look at how to get communication to those places, how to get teachers wired from certain places where we have good teachers, and for them to be able to extend the knowledge to these places. Now, I think that all the people who come from the senior high school would not get places in the universities. And I tell you that because the university has limited spaces. And so you're definitely going to have people drop out. But should that be the case, we probably need to look at the remote actually know that children in fossil and to be able to do exams and everything online, that is still bereft of fraudulent activities. And so technology can help us solve it. Our conversations need to be able to come up with solutions to help government with this, because we're looking at it today, but I tell you, in 2 years time we'll have this conversation where we'll find out that there are many children who are unable to get into universities. There are children where schools where there are no teachers, and technology probably is the way to solve this problem.
Definitely. Of course, technology will be the way. Again, reading from how technology, it's basically taking our jobs, for example. I think we should also have some sort of curriculum that would help us to be able to tackle these issues. Our governments from the past changed the curriculum that we currently have. Is there any thought about reviewing that as well, so that we can face this current challenges in terms of technological advancement?
Well, I to be honest with you, I haven't things to do with the conversations you had. So I won't be able to. I haven't really followed it keenly.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time again. Thank you so much, Rage, again.
No problem. Pleasure.
You to enjoy your weekend, and hopefully we'll catch up again in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rage. Pleasure.
Bye. Thank you.
All right then.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
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 Bye.